So where are
All
you
right.
coming from now? Are you on campus there or are you?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our seventh session for the 2020 UNCG Entrepreneur Day, our first ever virtual Entrepreneur Day. But this is our 10th annual Entrepreneur Day, typically done in person, but we appreciate you adjusting your schedule to join us online. I did want to note that we are recording tonight's session, so if you want to go back and review that, I think once we get those posted online, we'll send a note to everybody that signed up via Eventbrite so they can go back and rewatch the session if they want to. And we'll also have those posted on our website, which we will share. Before we get started with tonight's speaker, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Justin Strally, and I am Director of Launch UNCG here at UNC Greensboro, your one place to start something remarkable. Whether it is starting a side hustle, commercializing your research, doing something related to a nonprofit, we are here to help you. Not just take action on your idea, but also connect with regional resources that can help turn your vision into a reality. Tonight, we are fortunate enough to be joined by Larry Picket, who is the co-founder and CEO of RX Data Science. It is a 4-year-old startup providing healthcare, analytics software, and services. He has 25 years experience in IT leadership roles, including 20 years as a CIO at companies such as Merck, GE, and GlaxoSmithKline. Larry earned his BA in chemistry from UNC Chapel Hill and his MBA, a fellow Bryan School MBA from UNC Greensboro. So we're very excited to have you here tonight, Larry.
Thank you, Justin.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to post a link to your website as well as a link to your LinkedIn profile in the group chat here in case people want to follow up to learn more. But Larry, to start things off, I'll open it up with a question. Tell us a little bit about your professional journey that led to this startup and how things are going since you kicked that off 4 years ago.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Happy to be able to answer the questions, and after you go through your formal questions, then I'm hopeful that the students will also have questions as well. But as you mentioned in the intro, I got my undergraduate degree from UNC Chapel Hill in chemistry. And it was about my junior year that I kind of realized that I didn't want to work in the lab, and I really couldn't envision what I wanted to do with the chemistry degree. But I was too far along to really change, so I decided to go ahead and finish. And so then after I got my first job, I went back to school at night at the UNCG program, Bryan School, to get the MBA, because I recognized through those initial years in working that I did enjoy business, and I really didn't have the business background because I'd taken mostly the science classes, and so I felt like that MBA was really, really important to be able to understand that. And so that kind of launched me into my working career, if you will. And that was with a small publishing company in Chapel Hill. Really wasn't too much notable about that, except it got me started into computers, because that's when the first microcomputers and mini computers were coming out. And our company kind of asked me to lead the effort to kind of automate and figure out how to use them. So really, from a hands-on, very pragmatic perspective, I was asked to do that. So I kind of learned it on my own, and was able to hire some computer programmers and different people to help us along the way. And then the MBA was very, very helpful for me in terms of rounding it out from a business perspective. And then also I got the information systems concentration. So I was able to get kind of more of the academic background. And so then I proceeded for a couple of different corporate roles at ITT Telecom, and then at Glaxo, and actually it was GE before Glaxo. So what happened was I had a couple of one-year stints, and one story is pretty interesting. So I got a job heading up management of desktop services, or it's kind of called the help desk back then, and for ITT Telecom in Raleigh. So I moved from Chapel Hill to Raleigh. My wife moved with me. She decided to work there as well. And then one day after we'd both been there a year, they called it the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. They laid off 1,200 people. And my wife and I were both were laid off that same day. So massive shock early in your career. You've only 5 years out of school and you've picked up your family and moved and you get laid off. And so it was actually, looking back, one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it wasn't the day of emailing and websites and applying online, but literally within the next week, I was like knocking on doors in Research Triangle Park. I had my resume and was sharing that. And so I got a job with General Electric Aircraft Engine Group. And after I was a year there, Jack Welch was the CEO. And he said, you're either number one in your industry or number two, or you're not going to exist. Well, the division I was with was number three. So I ended up not losing my job, but needing to look for another job immediately. And so it was very interesting. So I kind of, moving into the corporate world, got laid off, then worked with a major corporation. It was downsizing. So then I finally kind of hit a winner. I went with Glaxo, if you will, and that got me into healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and I kind of continued with the information technology background. And it's there where I really understood kind of what was happening in healthcare and specifically pharmaceuticals, and was able to rotate around in different functional areas to get the experience that I needed, because I'd set a goal of being Chief Information Officer. In order to do that, I said I needed to get certain skills: infrastructure, commercial applications, clinical applications. And so I was rotating myself around. And after a merger, the role that I wanted to kind of round out that background went to another candidate. And so 1 month later, I was driving my family up to New Jersey, so I'd taken a role with Merck Medco to kind of get that experience I was looking for. And then, which was very challenging for anyone that lives in North Carolina. I love it. I just came back 5 years ago, but it was a very difficult thing. But, I had a career goal, and it was really important that I get that experience. So literally 1 year later, after I got that experience, I was asked to interview for the CIO job and was able to get that with a company. So, and then worked with that company for almost 20 years, and then just moved back to start RX Data Science 5 years ago. So I kind of have said a lot there. I mean, I can keep going, but I also want to, see if you have any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And everybody, feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. But Larry, you said a lot of great things there, and I'm seeing some parallels with what some recent grads may be going through right now with unexpected downsizing early in their career of no fault of their own. And you talked about setting goals for yourself of achieving that CIO role. Can you maybe talk about, maybe this is two separate questions in one, but can you talk about some strategies that you use to maintain your confidence in dealing with some of that adversity early in your career, and then maybe how you set that goal to be CIO and how you determine what things were needed to help you get there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the confidence really just comes from hard work and persistence, kind of rolling up your sleeves and getting out there. And I think once, we overcame losing that first job and we got another job, actually paying more, it was a better role, kind of realized that, life doesn't revolve around one company or one opportunity, but you have to think about your career a little bit more holistically. And there's a lot of parallels with starting a company as well, because you're going to get knocked down, you're going to have problems, you're going to have adversity. And I think, to me, the number one trait, for the entrepreneur is really persistence and just not letting those things take you down. I like to call it, it's almost like a roller coaster ride. You have some really, you get a good sale, or you hire, a good person on your team, and you're really, really excited. And then something happens the next week that, is not so positive, for example. And so I think you just have to get used to those ups and downs, and don't get too high or too low. So that's kind of one answer to it. The other thing is regarding the goals. This is really, really important, because everyone that I interview, it's very seldom that when I ask and I always ask kind of sometimes the basic questions, but strengths, weaknesses. But the main thing I ask is, what is your career goal, and how is this job going to help you, get where you want to go? I would say only 20% of the people even have an answer. it sounds like they haven't even thought about it. And when they talk about goals, maybe they've thought about this particular role and how it fits, maybe one role more, but they really haven't given, it hasn't communicated to me that they've really thought about the career and that they're really goal oriented. And so I think that's important. And I don't know, I was just got exposure with these different companies and different experiences and got to meet some of the chief information officers that I worked with. And I just kept thinking, that's a really great job. And I think I can do it. And what will it take for me to get there? So, but the very first thing I think is setting the goal. You have to say, what is your career goal? Where do you want to go? And then it's kind of then putting together that plan in terms of getting the experiences, getting some mentors, filling in any educational gaps and that type of thing to try to, get you quote unquote where you want to go. And then sometimes you have to make hard decisions. I mean, I did not want to move to New Jersey. I mean, for a North Carolina native to pick up and move somewhere, it was like I was moving to a different country, there. But it just makes you stronger when you find that you can thrive and do well in those environments. My wife and I used to joke and we said, well, it's going to be a 2-year adventure. We'll go to New Jersey, we'll be able to see the city, we'll be able to experience it. And then we'll be back in North Carolina in 2 or 3 years. Like 20 years later, we're still there because it turned out to be like a really good place to raise a family and the job opportunities were fantastic. So anyway, that's just a little bit of perspective there.
That's great. And so something you said that's also interesting is there's so many different directions that a recent grad or a student can go when it comes to finding a business opportunity or starting a career. And so you kind of started your career not quite knowing exactly where this was going to end up, but you knew you wanted to achieve some sort of leadership role. So that's sort of a relief to hear there, is that you don't have to have it all figured out your freshman year of college.
Right. Yeah, I think that's, I think we ideally think, okay, we're going to pick something we're going to major in, maybe even a graduate degree, and that's what we're going to love, and we're going to follow that path. And I think it doesn't always work out that way, and you just have to be flexible and kind of follow your passions and your interests, and not worry too much about what I would call the traditional path. And then it's really key, if you're not working for a big company that will rotate you into different roles and give you different experiences, and you kind of have to do that yourself and force that. I remember when I, was talking with the chief information officer at Glaxo, and I'd only been in one role for a year and was doing pretty well. And then I went into his office or my manager's office and I said, well, I'd really like to take on this new opportunity. And he's like, why? You're doing so great. You just got promoted. And I'm like, well, I really need that experience. And I'd really, so I convinced him that it was something I wanted to do. But yeah, I don't think people should be concerned if they haven't quite figured it out yet. There's plenty of time to do that. And I think it was, on into my early 30s that I really kind of set the goal and began to set the path. And I think it was somewhere in those early 30s, I said, well, by age 40, I want to be in this role for this company. So, and I made it, but maybe I was fortunate. So it wasn't just me, but it was, people that I worked with and other opportunities. But I mean, that goal and being flexible and getting the different experiences and being open to different opportunities is a good thing to do.
May I ask a question, Justin?
Sure, please.
Yeah, so hi, Larry, I'm Whitney.
Hi.
I would love to hear a little bit more about your mentorship process, because I know that it sounds like you've kind of kept this professional curiosity and things that draw your passion. You will ask about it and you'll go towards your interests. So I'd love to hear more, how you identified who your mentors you'd want them to be, how you approached them, and through this process, I'm guessing, but you tell me, I would love to know, have you had more than one mentor? How do you transition from one to a second, and have you ever mentored anyone? And I'd just love to hear a little more about that process, refining towards your ultimate passion and leading you here.
Yeah, that's a good question. And the mentors are really important. And they're almost like, a mentor sounds like a very formal thing where, you identify an individual and you have lunch with them every 2 months or something like that, and you bounce off questions. And I think that's good. And that's a good way to get started. And to me, the ideal is if you've identified that role or position that you would like, to find someone like that's in that role that you feel comfortable approaching and talking. And you're not going to connect with everyone. So I think you sometimes have to take a couple of different angles and talk to several different people before it kind of clicks. And I don't think you also have to use the word mentor. You can just say, I'd like to talk with you about this. You have an interesting role at some point in my career. I'd like to get there. I'd like to just pick your brain from time to time, if you don't mind. So you'll find people, and I do find that people are very open and willing to do that and try to help. And so you just have to approach multiple people. And then the other thing is, don't limit yourself to one. Have a whole team, of 3 or 4 or 5 people that may give you a different perspective. Like in technology, I mean, I wanted people that kind of knew different aspects of technology, but then I also wanted people that were very senior executives that had gone through how you kind of go up the ladder, so to speak. How do you watch out for the political landmines, and how do you avoid those types of problems? And then on the other hand, now I try to be a mentor or an advisor to other people that reach out to me, either in my own organization, or we just had recently had someone that was doing some writing for us. She was a journalism major at UNC, and we knew her dad. He was working with us on something, and she needed a job one summer. So a couple of years ago, she did some writing for us. And so she just would reach out to us and ask questions, or me, here and there. And so I think just people will be open. So don't be afraid to reach out and start a conversation, ask a question. And then ultimately, after maybe 2 or 3 discussions, maybe you say, okay, yeah, this is, I appreciate you being my mentor, providing that support. But sometimes if you use that, people think, oh no, there's a commitment. There's more to it than there actually is. Because it may just be a quick question. That's the other way I get time with people that don't have much time, is I'll ask them for 10 or 15 minutes. Like, and we did this with sales too. If they don't know, people don't know you either in sales or, you're networking, and you ask for a half an hour, that's a lot of time for people. But if you just say, I've got a quick question, can you refer me to someone else, or can you spend 10 minutes on the phone? Then you'd be surprised. Sometimes that technique works.
Very cool. Thank you. Yeah, I was curious about that because a lot of times, to your point, mentoring has that connotation of formality, and you have to have that agenda set up. So having that relational and kind of organic development is really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, it's phenomenal advice, Larry, especially as a student, just not being afraid to put yourself out there and ask, just say, hey, I want to be doing what you're doing in 10, 15, or 20 years. And I, get you a cup of coffee and ask you a few questions. That's a great thing to do no matter what career path you want to go down.
Yeah, my team likes to laugh at me because I will email or call anybody. And I mean, I had a problem with, wasn't a big problem. There was an issue in one of our client sites where an Amazon employee was kind of acting a little bit inappropriately, saying some negative things that they didn't really understand. So I emailed Jeff Bezos, and I know he doesn't answer it, but one of the executives did come back. I've done it twice now. It comes back within 24 hours and will call you and really address your issue for you. And so, yeah, I shouldn't be afraid to email or reach out via LinkedIn. You mentioned the networking. How do you do that? Conferences are good. Courses are good. Formal networking groups are good. I was always very active in, this thing called in technology, Society for Information Management. So any types of network groups where you get together, and I think through Eventbrite and other types of tools, there are different groups that you can find, but through LinkedIn, you can reach out as well. And then if you know someone that knows someone, and the LinkedIn is good for that because it shows you the linkages. I'm advising a company that's trying to come up with a COVID-19 diagnostic, and they're running a little late. There's a lot of diagnostics out there, but I didn't know the regulatory process for diagnostics. I've been involved with pharmaceuticals before. So one day I just got on LinkedIn, and I must have sent out 15 questions, a brief overview of what the company was doing and the fact that I need some guidance for regulatory. I found like 3 of the best consultants you could ever imagine just through that process. And one of them had been at FDA in the diagnostics division doing that type of work. And now they had their own consulting company. And so, again, it's just a matter of being willing to reach out and message somebody. And, half the people didn't even respond, but that can't bother you. The ones that responded were actually really, really good.
Larry, we've got a question in the chat that's sort of tied to what we've talked about so far, and also tied to some advice that you gave about early in your career about how you were a bit of a journeyman through a few different companies. Tyler asked, what if I do have career goals and personal goals, but I'm just not quite sure what I want to do yet? I think this networking piece is a great way to go about just talking with people in industries. Maybe some other advice that you might have for somebody that's a little bit unsure about what industry or vertical they want to pursue success in.
Yeah, I think you just kind of have to get started, and you have to do some self-analysis in terms of the type of work you like to do, the industries you may like to have an impact on, whether it's healthcare or energy or transportation, and just the types of things you like to do. So, for example, if you're an introvert, sales is probably not a good, I mean, it's an obvious example, but sales, getting out there and talking to people and interacting is probably not a good thing to do. I just read a lot of things to try to figure out what does interest me and talk to other people, ask questions. And, surely in your network group, either among students or graduates or friends or family or whatever, people that you say, wow, that's a really interesting job. I'm really interested in that industry. And again, just try to explore it, do as much research as you can. There's so much information now, via the search engines with Google or whatever, so many periodicals, you can do a lot of research there yourself. And then you just have to get started. I mean, if you want to do, if you're in technology, it's really simple because you have to see if you really want to do it and if you're hands-on. Like I could program, and I did some programming early in my career, but I wasn't the best designer and wasn't the best programmer. So, but I like technology. So I said, well, maybe I can move into management and get involved in, computer architecture and hardware. It doesn't just have to be software, but just trying to explore those things, get started with the job. There's pros and cons of big companies and small companies. So with small companies, you can wear many different hats. You can try many different things because they don't put you in a box. You don't have this assigned role. They want you to do more things because they don't have enough people and resources. So they might ask you to do something that you hadn't even really thought about. So one of my early jobs, they asked me to, work in the marketing and sales department. I was doing the computer stuff. I was doing some other things, but they said, well, we really don't have anybody. We want somebody to think about this. So I did that for a year. And so that gave me some good experience. It made me understand it, but it also made me understand that I didn't want to do that, for my whole career. So getting started, but then you work to a bigger company, tends to have many other opportunities, but sometimes they make you stay a year or two in one role, and then you can rotate to another. To me, the best company to go for, and I know Janssen or J&J used to have this, is companies that will have a program, especially if you're coming in with a management or PhD, that will intentionally rotate you among different departments. It's kind of a leadership development program. And that's kind of ideal. It's kind of difficult to find, but the bottom line is you really have to get started.
That's a good transition right there, Larry, because you spent a career being successful in a larger organization, and then you left that to start your own company. Is that something you always aspired to do, or is that an opportunity that you found? Talk more about your thought process there and how you found the opportunity.
That's a really interesting question, because I think everyone that works in technology, you kind of have the itch. You
I just have to walk out.
These companies really take off and do well. And you think, okay, I'd really like to do that. So I had this quote unquote itch to start my own company for many years before I did it. But I kind of needed to get to a certain point in my career and get comfortable with it before I was willing to take that leap, if you will. I think if you want to start something and work on it, I would encourage you to probably do it early in your career, not necessarily wait to when I did. But I think what I did was, I was exposed to a lot of different entrepreneurs. One of the things I did in my CIO role was every year starting, I don't know, I went to the very first one. There was a Wall Street Journal conference called D for digital. And they had a very unique conference format in that they invited relatively small number of people, maybe 500, 800 people into a room, and they would invite the CEOs of different technology companies to come and go for an in-depth interview and take questions from the audience, which normally you just don't get an hour and a half with these people. So I saw Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. You almost name any one of these CEOs of these technology companies going back about 8 or 9 years. I went out to Silicon Valley for 2 or 3 days every year at that conference and really tried to hear and understand where the future was going with some of these things. And so that's what really fueled my passion to do something around, artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, and big data. And then the intersection of that with healthcare and pharma in particular. And that really gave me the idea to start RX Data Science along with my co-founder, Sai Natarajan.
So you learned about that opportunity. You said, I'm going to look, 5, 10, 20 years into the future. What are some other opportunities that you see might be worth our students considering directing their career path for where things are going?
Yeah, I think anything, I kind of thought about that, for me, I think it has to be what the person's interested in. But for me, I think there's a lot of opportunities in technology. There's a lot of opportunities in healthcare, because healthcare, for, as research-based as it is and information-based, they don't really use data that effectively. And there's a massive amount of data that's going to be collected over the next, 5 to 10 years through sensors and wearables. And, we're working with one company that's kind of trying to equip the operating room of the future, where they're capturing all the digital aspects of an operation. And then they want to capture that, analyze it, over the course of time, and be able to figure out, how they can optimize the outcome of these particular procedures in the operating room. So there's an explosion of data, advanced analytics with AI, ML, and NLP is really, really interesting. Technology just continues to be fascinating. Things come up, the cloud, when I first got into IT, wasn't really a thing. And then all of a sudden, there was this explosion of people. And then when it first came out, everyone was like, no one is ever going to put their data and their applications in someone else's data center, quote unquote, in the cloud. Now, Amazon Web Services is like the largest cloud provider in the world. You have Microsoft Azure, you have Google, you have all these companies. Now it's kind of, you look at companies that aren't doing it and you're thinking, well, that's really, they really should be more forward thinking. So I think it's about 6 or 8 years ago, there's this thing, and I think it was one of the vendors said it, they called it SMAC, social, mobile, analytics, and cloud. And so those were the 4 technologies that were going to have the biggest impact, like over the next 5 years. And so that's when, I started to look at that. So I think what those next technologies probably are a continuation of artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, trying to figure out how you can use data and algorithms to predict what's going to happen from a business perspective, whether it's supply chain, it's commercial, it's clinical, it's, different aspects of the business. So I think understanding that, you don't have to be a data scientist. I mean, that's one role, but just understanding what it can do for you and how you run one of those projects is going to probably be really important to your future. Blockchain is kind of another one of those technologies. I've seen less pickup with that, but I still think there is a potential for it. And then I think you look at things like 5G, which it just means more bandwidth. It's just faster connectivity from your mobile devices, et cetera. I think all of those things are, going to be really big in the future.
Great. I wanted to take a second to see if anybody else had a question they wanted to ask Larry. And if not, feel free to always drop one in the chat. I've got a number of other good ones here that would be valuable. All right, we'll dive into to another one here. So every entrepreneur has to overcome some challenges, especially around resources, most specifically time and money. What are some recommendations that you have for folks to overcome specifically maybe those two challenges and other things that they're going to experience when starting a business?
Yeah, that's a big one because we're fortunate. We have a really talented technical team, and my co-founder is a brilliant software engineer and designer. And his problem is he has so many ideas, and there's nothing he can't do that he tends to bounce between them. And if he was in the room, he wouldn't be offended by me saying this, but he's brilliant, but he does get excited about a new idea. But what we've both learned over the last 4 years is, and I worked with Cy for 25 years, and the last 4.5 in Arcs data science, is we've learned that we really have to think through, is there a market for this? Is there going to be a paying customer? And we have to prioritize. And right now we have 4 platforms that we offer with our company. And I'm still pushing us to kind of get that to 2 platforms, because focus is really important for a small company. And so you just want to make sure you're not spread too thin. But I think, getting that focus, prioritizing, seeing what the market tells you. And then the bottom line is this: if someone is willing to pay for the product or service you're working on or developing, that's where you put your energy. We started off wanting to be a SaaS product, software as a service, product-based company. And we wanted to build those for the biopharma industry and clinical, commercial, et cetera. We were thinking kind of like Salesforce.com, using that platform, building specific applications for our industry. And we built, our guys are really phenomenal. It's a phenomenal team. Like in the first 3 or 4 months, they built 10 products. Well, guess what? No one bought anything. And so we're sitting here, we burned through now, we raised an initial round of funding. So we've burned through maybe a quarter of our cash, and we didn't have any sales. And so we're sitting here taking a step back, and then realized, you really have to do that front end marketing piece first to understand where that need is. Now, we didn't just dream up this stuff without any idea. We had done this at our previous company. They'd really liked it, but just because one customer likes it doesn't mean 10 are. And so we had to pivot to services, because that's what the customers were saying. We really don't want your product, but you know a lot about the cloud. You really know how to build software products. You know data and analytics. You know these data lakes. We want to bring you in to manage that for us. And so it became selling more of services. So today, our revenues are 90% services and 10% products. And that's not what we started out doing, but it's kind of where the paying customers were. And that's kind of how we ended up where we were. And that's, to answer your question, that's how we end up prioritizing.
You mentioned,
No.
you mentioned kind of front end marketing to kind of understand the consumer need. Are there other things that you do, user testing or co-collaboration or any servicing, or how do you get your feedback loops to understand if what you're developing is working for your target
Yeah.
customer?
So we typically sell into corporations, and we have a couple of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies as customers, and then we have some small emerging biotechs that may not even have a product that are customers. So what we find is we go in with an initial offering to help them solve a problem, like manage their data, put in a data lake, maybe put in a certain application, and then we listen to what is working well, and what the customer feedback is critical to us. And so with all the products that we built, we are just very intent on listening to what the customer finds helpful and what they find missing. So we add those features or functions that are missing. And then we try to now take that out through market research to bounce it off of 8 or 10 other customers to see what their feedback is on that. So that's kind of what, and we do have a testing organization that does test to make sure everything is working properly, but there's a whole process you go through to listen to that customer feedback. We can't like do everything they ask because, if you got a couple hundred people using a product, you would go crazy. So we have a governance structure where we put all those ideas in and we let the management of the client decide which ones we're going to prioritize. And that's typically the ones that are going to kind of add the most business value. So that's kind of the way we go about that.
So I'll put in a plug for a program that we run here at UNC Greensboro called iCorps, where we help students that have innovative ideas, faculty that are looking to commercialize their research, and even alumni that have some sort of innovative idea go out and do what's called customer discovery, where they talk with potential customers, potential partners, even competitors, really any kind of stakeholder that's going to be able to provide valuable feedback to really validate and invalidate if they have a great idea or not. And they're going to be able to ask questions to determine features, to determine who your ideal customer segments are, what the value proposition is. So I just put a link in the chat to a program that we have called iCore, and check it out, and would love to tell you more about it if that is something you're interested in.
And the other quick thing is you mentioned in the questions you sent me ahead of time, Justin, mistakes. We could have spent the whole session on my mistakes or mistakes that we made, but one was pretty interesting, and that and it points to another lesson. You kind of have to know what your blind spots are. See, I was in technology, and our team is like really phenomenal. They understand this stuff better than many companies, et cetera. And I never kind of really appreciated what sales and marketing did. I had so many vendors calling me, wanting my time. They want to explain what they're doing. I just wanted to minimize that. I just wanted my team to decide what we wanted to use. And when we started the company, we had like 90% of our resources were all technical doers, people that were hands-on with the technology. And so that was our strength, and that we can really execute. But we had a hard time getting customers early on because we didn't invest in sales and marketing. And I just looked back and said, that was one of my blind spots. I didn't really respect the time it took to build the relationships, put together a proposal, work with procurement to get the NDA in, do all the steps to actually make a sale. And so now, I mean, that was something I think it's important for people to do, is understand what their blind spots are, and then make sure, if you start something, you're not, you take that into consideration.
Great advice. I've got one last question, and then, but I wanted to open it up to see if any of our attendees had any other questions.
Hey, it's funny you mentioned the marketing aspect, because I'm actually planning to stick around for UNCG for my MBA, and I'm looking at combining marketing and data analytics. So I was wondering, from your experience, if you had found anything, the relation between those two, or maybe even how a small startup can use big data or data analytics to further their marketing goals.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think the hottest space there is actually in consumer goods and consumer marketing, because everything is digital now. I mean, every interaction that a consumer or customer, like for example, with Amazon, simple things, Netflix and Amazon are way ahead of everybody else in use of analytics and AI and ML and all that. And you probably know, if you're on Netflix, if you're on Amazon, they'll tell you what other people that bought what you bought, are also buying. And then it'll also make suggestions to you of what you might like. Or all that is because they're collecting like a massive amount of data across, demographics, nationwide or even worldwide. So I think that's a really interesting area in terms of how you collect data, how you use data, and how you leverage it to better understand the market. And then how do you attack a market, like in terms of where are the competitive advantages you can get, where are the weaknesses in a particular offering, and what, listening to the customer is so critical. What are they asking for? What are they not getting in the market, in the marketplace, if they're looking for certain products or services? And that data can tell you everything. So I think that's a really interesting, and it's going to be a hot area for many years to come.
Thank you.
Good question. Any other questions from our attendees? All right, Larry, I'll give you one last one here. You've given a lot of great advice, but what are some top things that college students should be doing right now to prepare to start a business or to start their career that they can take action on right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the coursework is obviously important, but I think to me the number one lesson or advice I would give either a student or someone early in their career is to network. And if you're not as comfortable doing it, I think you find that you will be, because you'll find people that are interested in what you're interested in. You can talk with them or whatever, but it seems like everything's about networking in terms of trying to connect with people that you might want to work with in the future. They might have different ideas, different experiences. When I was studying the chief information officer at Glaxo at the time, the one piece of advice he gave me, he said, network, and he said, get out of your office. Don't just sit there and work. I mean, you can be the best programmer and the best person sitting there doing a great job in your office, but reach out to people in other departments and other groups and people that have different expertise. I mean, everything's so complex now, and especially I always go back to technology because of what I said. No one can ever know every different aspect. And so reach out and talk to those people and network. Friends, family, whoever, people in school are also great at that as well. But I think to me, that's the number one thing. And then as you're talking to people, just kind of ask them, what they like about their role, what they like about their job, what they like about their companies. And I think just through that, you'll learn more and more. And then obviously, I do a lot on, I do a lot of reading and following people on LinkedIn in particular. I think for a professional network, that's really, really important. I don't even use Facebook that much. My wife does that for our family, to stay connected with friends and family that way. But from a professional connection, I like to stay with LinkedIn and, okay, Twitter as well. And then Instagram is good, but the social media and just searching and reading and subscribing, there's so much good content out there. McKinsey puts out things for free. I mean, they're the top management consulting company in the world. They have blogs and they put things out every week. I get frustrated getting so much of their mail, but just read those things and network, I think, would be the two pieces of advice.
Larry, this has been a great session. I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight.
Well, you're welcome. And I enjoyed the questions. They were great questions. And if anyone wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn or otherwise, then I'm happy to try to elaborate more in the future. But thank you very much.
And thank you all for taking some time to join us tonight. Again, I'll refer you to the chat box to go back and connect with Larry on LinkedIn, as well as check out his website. I also put a link to our virtual UNCG Entrepreneur Day website. We've got one more session after this at 6:30, so I'd recommend that you check that out. And we'll be sending you details on the recording of this version. So thank you all very much for attending and enjoy the rest of your night.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Justin.
much.
See ya.
Bye.